So we are going to be covering quite a bit of information today. And so one of the big things to note, and I'll say this at the end as well, is that for attending, you are entitled to a free consultation. So this is, like I said, a decent amount of information in a relatively short amount of time. And so I very much encourage you to not only take advantage of that consultation for this topic, but for any estate planning needs that you may have. If you're already a client, you know that we're here to help you out with your estate plan. If you're not a client and have questions on estate planning or what it is that we do or who we are more than happy to answer those. All right, so let's get you guys started. So I'm Victoria. I am one of the estate planning attorneys with the Koppenberger Law Firm. I primarily work up in our Northern California offices, but we can also always meet with you via Zoom. So if you have an attorney that you specifically want to work with, but we're not in your direct location, you can always meet with us on Zoom or the phone, and we can do it that way. Now, before we jump into the actual topic, I want to introduce, especially for those of you who don't know us, I want to give you a little introduction to who we are. So we are one of the largest estate planning firms in the state, let alone the country. And part of that reasoning is not only because just the sheer number of attorneys that we have for an estate planning firm, but it's also because we have these specialists. So we have attorneys who have gone on to be more advanced than your just average attorney. What that also means is that we have numerous departments here. So not only do we do estate planning, which focuses on the revocable trust, the gun trust, more specialized things, we also have an estate administration department, a business and tax department, and a litigation department. The estate administration department is a vital component of how we are able to assist our clients throughout the estate planning journey, because we know at some point we're all going to pass away or a loved one is going to pass away. And so that department is able to walk alongside your friends, your family, who's ever going to be dealing with the aftermath, and take a lot of that burden and weight off of their shoulders. Our business and tax department is able to assist you with more advanced planning that may have to do with businesses or taxes. So if you have any questions on those things, we can absolutely address it. And then we hope no one ever has to be in court, but we know that things happen. There's times it is necessary. And so we do also have a litigation attorney who very recently joined our firm, but has actually worked with the Koppenberger family throughout a different practice for many, many years. And so we're excited to have her. Again, we hope people don't need her services for anything at this point, but if you do, we can absolutely help you out there as well. But as attorneys, we could not do what we do without our absolutely wonderful staff. So we have a huge staff that is there to make sure our clients' needs are met, questions are answered, that we can do things in as timely a fashion as is possible. So if you do work with us, odds are not only will you work with your attorney, you will also have a team member or multiple that are dedicated to your file as well. And I mentioned we have offices in the state. And so not only do we have our Northern California, we also have quite a few in Southern California. So if you're, again, in a physical location and want to meet with us, we're there for you. Or if you move to a different location, odds are we can also then be there for you, or we can always be there via Zoom. All right, so let's now get into the topic component. What are we going to be addressing today? So guns always evoke some kind of an emotion, whether you love them, you're neutral, or you hate them. There's always some sort of a response to guns. What we really want to focus on is how the safety component can be married with estate planning, and how your gun protection can be married with estate planning. For a lot of our gun owners, they want to absolutely ensure, I would say for the vast majority of our gun owners, one of the primary concerns they have after they pass away is what's going to happen with this gun, who's it going to go to, and they do want to ensure that laws are complied with. What we're partially going to show you today, though, is especially living in California, laws are relatively consistently changing to tighten restrictions on guns, who can own them, and things surrounding guns in general. So with that being said, it can be a very complicated topic. And for the person who may be inheriting a gun, they may not have kept up to date on those if they were not a gun owner themselves, but are now just the inheritor of one. So it's really important to have an awareness of the fact that as a gun owner, a gun inheritor, a gun, whatever you are, that we want to really ensure that you are following that legal component so that there's no issues for you, for the person inheriting, or anyone involved. But again, we understand that there is a lot of emotion with this. And so the reason we are doing this is not only to ensure that guns do have a place to go after you pass, but also to reassure people that it's a safe way of doing it. All right. Oops, sorry. So what is a gun trust? Why do you need one? What's the importance of it? So a gun trust is something that actually allows for the ownership and transfer of firearms within guidelines of both federal and state laws. So unfortunately with guns, you're not just dealing with one set of rules, you're generally dealing with at least two, and sometimes even local rules can be on top of that. But it is literally a type of trust. So for those of you who already have trusts, you understand that a trust is something that houses your assets. This is extremely similar. A gun trust is where you can basically house your firearms and say who is going to be your trustee, which means who will manage them if you're no longer alive, but ultimately who is going to inherit them after you pass away. This can be extremely important, especially for those of our clients who come to us and they want their children to inherit, but they have minor children at the time they're doing the estate planning. There can be obviously issues with a minor having a gun transferred to them if they are not of a legal age to possess it. And so with the gun trust, even though you name beneficiaries like you would in a normal trust, it can comply with the laws so that that beneficiary is not at risk of falling under a violation of law. One of the other main advantages is that it allows for the shared use and possession of firearms among those listed in the trust. And it does make the transfer of those firearms easier after the person passes away. And again, it provides this layer of legal protection because it is helping the person, or now the beneficiary, ensure that they are complying with any regulations that are in place at that time. So there are a number of benefits to a gun trust. First and foremost, again, it's an easier transfer. So without a gun trust, firearms that are under the NFA can actually become a burden to the person who is inheriting because, as I mentioned, they might unintentionally violate a law when they inherit these items. We'll again talk about this more in a minute. But in California, again, however you fall on the side of guns, you understand that California is extremely restrictive when it comes to firearms. We are probably one of the more restrictive states at this point, if not the most. So what can happen is, as laws are shifting, again, if a beneficiary has not kept up to date on laws and they just accept the item as part of their inheritance, there can be some, unfortunately, extremely poor consequences of that happening. The gun trust helps to alleviate that concern for all involved. Another big one that I'm going to jump to is that it avoids probate. So guns can have a significant value to them, especially from a historic standpoint. There are certain guns, obviously, that then can have growth in their value. And so when we're looking at what happens after someone passes away, we're always concerned about probate. Now, for those of you who don't know what probate is, that is the process that occurs for an asset if it hasn't already been designated for where it goes through a trust. So if you don't have a trust and you pass away and an item or an asset has hit a certain value, the court is going to get involved and decide where that item goes. So not only does that take control out of your hands or your family's hands, but it also means that then the firearm may not go to who you would have wanted. It may not go to anyone at all. And so avoiding probate is a huge piece to ensure that your wishes are ultimately the ones that are carried out. And another big piece is the estate planning component. So again, a gun trust is a form of estate planning. So when we look at people and their assets, even if you have a revocable trust, it may not be enough to fully protect the scope of your assets or your family. And so when you come and talk to us, even if your primary focus is on your house, your cash, your investments, we also want to know about your guns, your stuff. It could be antiques, it could be whatever it is, because that is such a vital part of the planning that we do. Now, again, California firearm ownership and regulation is vital due to the state's unique and stringent gun laws. We do have extremely restrictive gun laws compared to many of the other states in the US, including how we define certain guns, like assault weapons, or different restrictions that we have on firearms. So understanding how this trust works and how it can protect you or whoever's inheriting is a vital component of gun ownership. It also helps, again, avoid legal pitfalls. So we never want to see somebody improperly transfer any asset, let alone one that could have consequences that include criminal charges. This is something that should absolutely be avoided and can be avoided. It also helps keep everything private. So if something has to go into probate, unfortunately, that becomes a matter of public record. Now, we've talked in prior webinars about probate and wanting to protect privacy for asset information, family information, gun ownership information, and this is absolutely tied into that. We understand people want to keep things private, and for good reason. And so this is yet another way to ensure that nothing is going to be made public after you pass. And again, we understand that when it comes to guns, any kind of thing that can be a deadly weapon, there's going to be some safety and public concerns. So given that, the nice thing is that a gun trust helps reassure people around you and in the community that this is a safe, legal way to transfer guns. It helps marry the two worlds and frankly, marry the two sides that we know are out there. And so with gun trust, it very much helps reassure anyone in your life who may be nervous about a gun. It reassures them that you are taking the responsible steps to ensure legal ownership will continue, safe ownership will continue, and that laws are being complied with. So let's give you a little bit of legal background for those of you who may not know much about guns, or you might know more than we even are putting in this webinar. We still want to give a little bit of background of why, again, that this is so important. So there is federal regulation that was passed back in 1934. That was the first federal regulation on the manufacture, sale, and possession of firearms. Essentially, there are rules when it comes to making them, selling them, and possessing them. So the NFA actually will impose a tax on the manufacture and transfer of those firearms, and it mandates that the firearms have to be registered with the Secretary of the Treasury. So again, not only do you have to own it, or can you own it, it then has to be registered. With that being said, we have talked with many clients whose guns have been passed down, registration rules have changed, and they are concerned about, as again, guns are passed down through generations, are they going to fall at risk of violating these different changing regulations? One of the ways that we can help, again, avoid that is this gun trust. So it's all about balance. We want to make sure that you have a right to own a firearm, but we also do want to help ensure that there is safe gun control, especially after you are gone. You might know that you are a legal, safe, responsible gun owner, but it doesn't necessarily mean after you're gone that whoever has it would fall under those same categories from a legal standpoint. And so again, we're looking to balance and ensure that whoever is going to be the inheritor is able to comply with those rules so that they, as we mentioned, are not at risk of consequences, including that criminal liability. So why do you need one? Well, we've mentioned quite a few of these. So again, the advantages, the big one, ease of transfer. So a properly constructed gun trust can allow for a smoother transition of firearm ownership once somebody passes away, avoiding a lot of complications, including probate. Shared use. A gun trust actually allows multiple people, so the trustees, the managers, to use and possess the firearms within the trust. This can be really helpful for families or groups of people who want to share the use of the firearm. For some people, they like to hunt with the firearms, and so maybe they want to share it or be able to use it for hunting trips. It could be, again, that it's been passed down through generations and there's some historic, emotional, or other reason that the family actually has a collective interest in that firearm. So it allows you to not just have to pick one person who's able to have it or possess it legally. You can have then numerous. I keep saying it. A big one is, again, legal compliance. Forgetting just even guns, everything we do as attorneys is ensuring that things comply legally, and this is absolutely no different. So a gun trust is able to provide a degree of legal protection by ensuring all actions taken with the firearms will comply with both the state and federal law, including California's strict gun control laws. So our gun trusts are very much constructed with California's rules in mind to ensure that, again, there's no risk of triggering illegal incompliance. We've talked a fair amount about privacy. We're keeping it out of court. We're keeping it out of the public eye. It's nobody else's business. It's your family's or your friends or whoever you want involved, no one else. It also allows you to do some future planning. So with one of the biggest concerns is that when you draft just a revocable trust and you say, I want my gun to go to my child. Well, we'd like to think our kids will never do anything wrong. But what happens if by the time you have passed away, your child's committed a crime and they are now a legal felon? Well, they should not then be in possession of a firearm. They cannot legally be in possession at that point of that firearm. And the gun trust can offer ways to actually adjust who would inherit based on the legality at the time. So if there has been a condition that now would trigger an illegal possession of firearms, the trustee can make an adjustment accordingly. So it can absolutely protect the person from not risking re-offending at that point, and it can add the protection to the community at that time. So especially in a state like California, we're forgetting even the felon component. That was a large example. It's an easy example to understand. It can even be as simple as today a 21-year-old can possess a handgun, but tomorrow it's that a 35-year-old can possess a handgun, or that they reduce to 18 for some things. As things shift, your gun trust, your trustee is able to look at that, evaluate it, and ensure that nobody's going to get accidentally in trouble by receiving that firearm. And then, as I've mentioned, avoiding an accidental felony. So by clearly defining who can use and possess that firearm, it absolutely avoids situations where an individual might unknowingly commit a felony by having or using a firearm they are not legally entitled to handle. Again, we cannot harp on this enough. Because of how strict California is, they do not take this lightly. And so we absolutely want to make sure that the person who you want to leave that to does not risk triggering a legal incompliance that could result in criminal charges. So how do you establish this? First and foremost, seek legal counsel. We emphasize this even for our revocable trusts. And with revocable trust, generally speaking, if it is done, if you decide to go the cheap route, it's done incorrectly. Typically, the worst thing that happens to people is they might lose some money in probate. They get stuck in probate. It's exhausting, but most of it has to center around emotion and the finance component. With a gun trust in particular, with guns, again, there is absolutely a criminal component that can be triggered if it is not done properly. So seek good, competent legal counsel who does this on a fairly regular basis. You don't want to work with an attorney who has never done this and serve as their guinea pig, because there are too many risks if it is not done properly, especially if you are going to stay in California until you pass away. Next step would be, after you've met with the counsel and we've discussed what you need, we've gone over who you want it to go to, who's going to manage it, what guns you have, we have to actually draft this. So during the drafting, we're going to be defining the terms. We identify who the manager would be, who's going to benefit as a result of receiving those, and we can specify the different procedures for adding or removing firearms from the trust. But these absolutely need to be drafted with care to ensure they're meeting all legal requirements. I mentioned this already, but you need to actually identify the firearms. So the firearms included in the trust should be identified. That way there's no risk of one that somebody wasn't aware of that's now involved and getting transferred again to someone who shouldn't be the owner or beneficiary of it. You also have to register them. So each firearm in the trust has to be properly registered according to state and federal laws. Now, with registration, this can be very complex depending on the type of gun, when it was made, when you acquired it, who acquired it, all of these different components. So this can take several months to accomplish, to make sure that each one that you own is going to properly comply with the registration requirements. But we can still be working on your gun trust as those things are done. And then after that's done, we actually transfer them into a gun trust. So at that point, we need to make sure that all of the relevant transfer laws and regulations are followed, which often does involve a background check and some waiting periods. Now, we can assist with this and help walk you through, but again, we want to make you aware that there is an element of time that goes into this. You need to make sure, as we talked about, that a successor trustee is named. Now, when we talk about a trustee, it's right in the name. It needs to be somebody that you trust, especially when, again, it comes to an asset like a gun. So the trustee themselves it has to be someone who is legally allowed to possess the firearms in the trust. Don't name somebody who out the gate is not going to be in legal compliance with the law. You need it to be somebody who would be in legal compliance. Now, as we've talked about, things shift. And so we generally then will recommend naming backup trustees to that primary person who would take over. That way, if that person is unable or unwilling to serve, you have backups even to that person. And ultimately, the trust should provide for future changes. So it should include provisions for adding or removing firearms, changing the trustees or beneficiaries, and any other changes that are needed in the future. You don't want it to be set in stone for that moment in time, because if the law then shifts, you need the trust to be able to shift accordingly. So during the drafting, again, we'll actually name not only the trust, but also its beneficiaries. So when you're thinking about beneficiaries, if they are a minor, we need to specify what would happen until the child reached an age that they could legally possess a firearm. If it is somebody who has any they maybe don't live in the state, we do need to address that as well. There's different components that go into choosing your beneficiaries. Again, with transferring, we absolutely need to ensure that they comply with the regulations. So at that point, we're going to walk through and look at that piece with you, and then help point you in the right direction if you don't already know. Now, some of the issues with it. So this is more addressing concerns that people have who either don't own guns or concerned about legal gun ownership. There's always going to be a concern that people will misuse gun trusts for illegal activities. This is in part why it is so imperative that to help reassure the community that you are a responsible gun owner, that you work with very competent counsel when it comes to establishing a gun trust. Because if you work with an attorney who maybe doesn't know what they're doing, or they're taking the easy route, so to speak, it can absolutely lead to people misusing gun trusts for illegal activities. There's obviously going to be, as we talked about, public safety concerns, especially in California, but anywhere when it comes to a gun, especially when it's a thing that could ultimately kill someone. So part of what we really want to emphasize is, again, utilizing a gun trust helps reassure people. It also can help reassure you that your beneficiary is not going to end up in trouble, because again, the trust will account for changes and life shifts. Ultimately, though, there are people who want to call for even stricter regulation within California. And so we know that laws are likely not going to stay stagnant. We actually, in just a moment, will show you how much things have changed just in the last couple of years. And so that is where, again, your gun trust can account for those changes and give you that peace of mind. But ultimately, everything we talk about with this is balance. We want to make sure that your individual rights are protected and that public safety is still acknowledged and respected on its own. So society needs public safety, but based on the Second Amendment, you do have a right to bear arms. And so with this gun trust, it is really marrying the two components. It is helping that legal transfer occur, and it is ensuring that you don't lose, or your family doesn't lose, the firearm as a result of an improper transfer. So there's a lot of considerations when we're looking at this. Another huge one is mental health considerations. This is a very, very critical factor when we're looking at this balance. So many issues that arise in the news that come up with guns is the person was not mentally healthy. So there's a lot of people arguing for improved mental health screening and treatment to prevent those at risk from causing harm to themselves or others without going into more. With that being said, again, the good news is if it is someone that should not legally own that gun, the trustee will build in things where the trustee can take that into consideration to help avoid any potential risk that that can then have. And because you are choosing the trustee, it's typically then somebody who you know won't abuse that privilege, because I know that can be another concern. But it's all about balance. Everything that we're looking at on this piece is about balance. Now let's look at a few case studies. So just certain things, some examples that can help understand why they're helpful and even some of the issues that can arise with not having them. So this first one, we have John Martin, he's a law-abiding citizen and a lifelong firearm enthusiast in California who owns a collection of firearms, including some Title II weapons regulated by the NFA. He wants to ensure that his firearms could be legally possessed and used by his family and passed on to his children after his death without any legal complications. So that's some background. So now we know that he wants to ensure that these can be legally possessed once he's gone. So he comes and establishes a gun trust. He consults with a knowledgeable attorney who specializes in gun trusts, and together they create the Martin Family Gun Trust. It was carefully designed to comply with all federal and California state laws and included his wife, his adult son as co-trustees. This allowed all three of them to use and possess the firearms in the trust legally. It also named his son, Alex, as the successor trustee and primary beneficiary after John passed away. So what did this mean? Well, this gun trust offered several advantages. It allowed for a legal way for Lisa and Alex to use and possess the NFA-regulated firearms without each of them needing to go through the complex application process. It also provided a measure of protection against accidental violations of firearm laws. And it also meant that after they had passed away, that their son would be the one to benefit in accordance with their wishes. Because after John passed away and because of his gun trust, the transition of his firearm ownership was smooth without the need for probate or any additional transfers. Alex, as the successor trustee, took over the management of the trust and continued to abide by all of the legal requirements for the possession and use of firearms. So this case was a perfect prime example to show the benefits of a well-constructed gun trust in California. It shows that there is an absolute importance to make sure that the legality is complied with, that there was the ability to have shared use and possession of firearms. It was an easy transfer after he passed away, and it provided legal protection for all of the family members. Let's see. All right. The next one is dealing with the Thompson Family Gun Trust mishap. So this is dealing with a man named Richard Thompson, who's a resident of California, and he had a sizable collection of firearms, including some covered under the NFA. To ensure the shared use and future inheritance of these firearms, he decided to establish a gun trust, but without consulting a knowledgeable attorney. Instead, he used a generic trust template he found online. So he named himself as the initial trustee with his wife and adult daughter as co-trustees. He also appointed his daughter as the successor trustee, but he did not fully understand California and federal firearm laws, and he mistakenly included several firearms in the trust that his daughter, due to a past legal issue, was not allowed to possess. So when Richard passed away and his daughter, as the successor trustee, took possession of the firearms in the trust and attempted to register them, it came to light she was a prohibited person under the federal law due to the previous misdemeanor conviction. So this immediately placed her in violation of state and federal laws, resulting in legal penalties and the confiscation of the firearms. The situation was further complicated by the fact that the trust was not correctly set up to comply with California gun laws, causing additional legal issues for the family. So this is a case in point of why you need to work with a qualified professional, because for most people, they aren't going to know every single gun law or thing that occurs and every time it changes. And so unfortunately, by not working with someone who could set it up to adjust accordingly, or who could have counseled him to say, it's probably not the right person to name as your beneficiary, it wound them up in a slew of issues and legal issues. So it also absolutely shows the importance of making sure that everyone named in the trust is legally permitted to possess the firearms. And if they end up not being, that the trustee can adjust accordingly. All right, and so here's one more just to again hammer home why it's important to have a good gun trust established. So James Davis is a resident of California. He owned an extensive collection of firearms, again, including some Title II weapons regulated by the NFA. He intended to pass these firearms onto his son, Michael, upon his passing. However, he did not establish a gun trust or take any legal steps to manage the future transfer of these firearms. Well, we know life doesn't always go according to plan, so James passed away unexpectedly. Following his will, his son Michael inherited his father's entire estate, including the firearm collection. However, without a gun trust in place, this transfer wasn't managed in compliance with the intricate laws surrounding the NFA firearms. Unaware of the legal requirements, because again, we don't expect everyone to know every single requirement all the time, Michael unfortunately found himself possessing the NFA firearms without having gone through the necessary background checks or tax stamp acquisitions. What that meant is a few months later, Michael used one of these firearms at a shooting range, and an officer on the range recognized the weapon as a Title II firearm and asked him for the required tax stamp documentation. When he could not provide it, the officer had to report the violation. Michael unfortunately then faced significant legal consequences for illegally possessing NFA firearms, including potential fines and imprisonment. And unfortunately, again, those firearms were then seized by law enforcement. So this is another one just absolutely emphasizing that there are really negative legal repercussions that can occur and from the result of improperly transferring and possessing these firearms, and the importance of using a legal mechanism like a gun trust to ensure that those transfers are done properly and appropriately. It also highlights, unfortunately, how misunderstanding or even ignoring some of the gun laws can lead to these severe outcomes, which is why, again, having counsel that is able to guide you and help you allows you to then rely on someone else to keep up to date rather than you having to. So I'm not going to go over all of these, but we really do want to emphasize that there have been quite a few law changes done in the last couple of years. So just in 2021, you can see there were a handful of laws that were passed that absolutely impact firearms, who can possess them, and consequences of illegally possessing them. Then there were even more in 2022. Again, what we are emphasizing here is laws change, and if you live in California, there are a lot of advantages. When it comes to guns, it is extremely restrictive and changes pretty darn frequently and often. So it again, with the gun trust, it helps ensure that as these laws change, you don't have to keep up with every single one. We recommend you have an understanding as a responsible firearm owner, but it's impossible for every person to know every single law around every single topic. And so this is where, with that gun trust, again, it gives you a safety net. It gives your family a safety net so that they don't have to be paranoid about what they may or may not have missed. So as I mentioned, that was a lot of information that we are going through, but what we really want to establish here is it's important not only to understand California gun trusts, but to understand how they work to ensure that you have legal compliance when it comes to your estate planning after you pass away. It also helps address any potential challenges in areas for future policy development in California. But frankly, this is for any state, even the least restrictive states in the country. Gun laws change. And so even if you live in a state that is very gun friendly, things do change. Restrictions on who can answer changes. And so who can possess, sorry, changes. And so at this point, the gun trust, whether it's established in California, Nevada, Texas, Florida, it does not matter. It will help ensure that any potential changes in the future get addressed. So hopefully at this point you have picked up on that we can absolutely help you establish these gun trusts. We are here to make sure that not only are your gun trust needs taken care of, but any estate planning needs that you have are addressed. We have been open for about now 44 going on 45 years and have been working with people to help ensure that all of their assets are properly protected for that length of time. We want to make sure that our clients have a reliable resource to make sure that whatever the questions are or the concerns are, that you have somewhere to turn to. So I mentioned this at the very beginning. So for those of you who were able to jump on at the very, very start, you heard me say that by sitting and attending, you are entitled to a free consultation with any of our attorneys. So if you have any further questions on gun trusts or anything that we do, you can absolutely take advantage of that consultation. After this, you will be receiving an automated phone call asking if you're interested in setting up that appointment, and I do encourage you to take advantage of that. But we are here to help. So anything that you need from us from an estate planning standpoint, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our team is standing by. I see that we have a few questions in the chat, so we're going to type out some answers for you there. But if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to put them in. We're going to stick around for a few minutes after this and answer any more questions that you have. But thank you so much for attending today. I hope that this was informative, and we are looking forward to working with you. Thank you. All right, thank you, everybody. It looks like there's no other questions coming in at this point, but if you do have any more, please, again, take advantage of that free consultation. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to speaking with you soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.